November 8, 2022. Somewhere in Nassau, the Bahamas, a 29-year-old man is sitting in front of a bank of monitors in a luxury penthouse apartment. He is wearing a gray t-shirt and cargo shorts. He looks exhausted. He is watching his net worth, once estimated at $26 billion, fall towards zero in real time. Over $6 billion in withdrawal requests have hit his platform in a single day. The system is slowing down. For many users, the money simply isn't moving. His name is Sam Bankman-Fried. 12 months earlier, he had been called the next Warren Buffett, the savior of crypto, the most effective altruist alive. He had testified before Congress, he had appeared on the covers of magazines, he had donated tens of millions to political campaigns. In 72 hours, it would all be gone. This is the story of how one person convinced nearly the entire world he was something extraordinary, and what was actually happening underneath. Part 1. Where he came from. Sam Bankman-Fried was born on March 6, 1992, in Stanford, California. If you wanted to design the perfect academic household, you'd be hard-pressed to improve on this one. His father, Joseph Bankman, is a professor at Stanford Law School. His mother, Barbara Fried, is also a Stanford law professor and co-founded a major Democratic political fundraising organization. Both parents were serious intellectuals. Ideas were the currency of the dinner table. Sam grew up quieter than you might expect, not particularly social, more comfortable with systems and numbers than with people. He played competitive chess. He thought in abstractions. He was, by his own description, deeply interested in logic and deeply uncomfortable with ambiguity. In high school, he encountered a philosophical movement called effective altruism. The core idea is simple. If you actually want to do good in the world, you should think rigorously about how to maximize your impact. Don't give to the charity that makes you feel good. Measure outcomes. Run the numbers. Put your resources where they save the most lives per dollar. For a teenager who already thought in probabilities, this was not just appealing. It was a revelation. Ethics wasn't a feeling. It was an optimization problem. He enrolled at MIT, studied physics and mathematics, and deepened his involvement in effective altruist circles. He connected with the philosopher Will MacAskill, who introduced him to a concept that would define the next decade of his life: earn to give. The idea was this: if you want to help the maximum number of people, sometimes the highest impact thing you can do is not go work directly for a charity. Sometimes the highest impact thing is to go make as much money as you possibly can, and then give the majority of it away. A talented trader who earns $1 billion and donates 90% accomplishes more than 10 people who each give away everything they earn. Sam didn't treat this as an idea. He treated it as a mission. Part 2. Learning the trade. After graduating from MIT in 2014, Sam joined Jane Street Capital in New York. Jane Street is not a consumer brand. Most people outside finance have never heard of it. Inside finance, it is legendary. One of the most sophisticated quantitative trading firms in the world, famous for hiring mathematicians and physicists and training them to find tiny, fleeting mispricings in financial markets and exploit them over and over at enormous scale. Sam was good at it. He was fast. He was comfortable with large numbers and large risks. He didn't hesitate when most people would. He thought probabilistically, not in terms of what was most likely to happen, but in terms of the full distribution of what could happen, weighted by probability. He was also, during this period, doing exactly what he had promised himself, donating a significant portion of his income to effective altruist causes. He was living the philosophy, but in 2017, he found something that changed everything. Bitcoin was trading at wildly different prices on different exchanges. In the United States, one Bitcoin might cost $10,000. In Japan and South Korea, the same asset was trading for 15 or even 20% more. If you could buy cheap in one market and sell expensive in another, you could make large, nearly risk-free profits. This kind of gap, arbitrage, doesn't survive long in traditional financial markets. Sophisticated players close it within milliseconds. But crypto was new. The infrastructure was immature, the exchanges were inefficient and disconnected. Most of the players had no idea what they were doing. Sam knew exactly what he was doing. He left Jane Street. He moved to Berkeley. In late 2017, he founded Alameda Research. Part 3. Building the Machine. Alameda Research started as a crypto arbitrage operation. Sam and a small team found price gaps between exchanges, executed trades at scale, and collected the spread. The returns were extraordinary. In January 2018 alone, the firm reportedly made $25 million in a single month. The Japan-Korea premium alone was generating millions every day. Alameda evolved quickly. It moved from arbitrage into broader trading, then into market making, then into lending. It grew fast and aggressively, taking on more and more complexity as it expanded. And then, Sam saw a larger opportunity. The crypto exchanges that existed at the time were, almost without exception, unreliable, expensive, and poorly designed. Millions of retail traders were trying to participate in these markets and getting a bad experience. The infrastructure was not keeping up with the demand. In May 2019, Sam Bankman-Fried launched FTX. FTX was different. It offered sophisticated financial products, futures, options, leverage tokens that existing platforms couldn't handle well. It was operationally stable. When markets went volatile and other exchanges crashed under traffic, FTX stayed up. And Sam himself was different. He was visible in a way that crypto founders rarely were. He was on Twitter constantly. He did interviews with mainstream journalists. He called regulators and answered their questions. He testified before Congress. In a space full of anonymous founders and pseudonymous developers, he was aggressively, deliberately present. FTX relocated to the Bahamas in 2021, where a new regulatory framework had been established for digital asset businesses. Sam and his core team moved into a cluster of luxury apartments in Nassau, working and living together in a kind of permanent startup commune. The growth was staggering. By 2021, FTX was processing billions of dollars in daily volume. It signed a naming rights deal for the Miami Heat's arena, $135 million over 30 years. It ran Super Bowl advertisements. It landed celebrity endorsements from Tom Brady, Stephen Curry, and Larry David. In January 2022, FTX raised $800 million at a valuation of $32 billion. Sam's personal net worth was estimated at $26 billion. At 29, he was one of the richest people on the planet. Part 4. The image. What made Sam uniquely powerful was not just the money. It was the story. He was aggressively, almost performatively, unflashy. The same gray t-shirts and cargo shorts everywhere. To congressional hearings, to investor meetings, to magazine photo shoots. He drove a Toyota Corolla. He slept on a beanbag in his office. He ate cheap food. He talked constantly about giving it all away. In interview after interview, he described a plan to donate the overwhelming majority of his wealth to effective altruist causes. Pandemic preparedness, AI safety research, global poverty relief. He wasn't building a personal fortune, he said. He was building a conduit. A temporary holding account that would eventually flow out into the world to save lives. This was an extraordinarily effective narrative. It gave journalists a frame. It gave regulators a reason to trust him. It gave politicians a story to tell when they took his donations. He reportedly became one of the largest individual donors to Democratic political campaigns in the 2022 midterm cycle. Members of Congress praised him publicly. He was seen as the responsible actor in a space full of bad actors, the adult in the room, the one who understood both the technology and the policy, the one who wanted real regulation rather than a free-for-all. One long profile after another described a young genius who had cracked something about markets, about ethics, about how to live, that the rest of us were still fumbling toward. The picture was compelling. It was also, in crucial ways, false. Part 5. What was actually happening? To understand the collapse, you need to understand one relationship. FTX and Alameda Research were supposed to be separate. FTX was the exchange. It held customer deposits in custody. Alameda was the trading firm. It traded with its own capital. Sam ran both, but they were meant to operate independently, with clear walls between them. The wall had been removed. Alameda had been given special access to FTX customer funds. When Alameda needed capital, for trades, for loans, for investments, it could draw on the deposits that FTX customers believed were sitting safely in their accounts. The customers did not know this. The investors did not know this. The regulators did not know this. By the time the crisis hit, Alameda owed FTX approximately $8 billion in customer money. That had been lent out, spent, or sunk into illiquid investments that could not be quickly sold. Alameda's balance sheet also held billions of dollars in FTT, FTX's own proprietary token. This created a circular problem. FTT was only valuable because FTX was valuable. If confidence in FTX fell, FTT would collapse, at precisely the moment Alameda needed those assets most. This was a house of cards, global, interconnected, and dependent for its continued existence on no one looking too closely. Part 6. The Collapse. On November 2nd, 2022, the crypto news outlet CoinDesk published a story. The story described a leaked balance sheet from Alameda Research. The document showed that a significant portion of Alameda's listed assets were in FTT tokens, FTX's own currency. For anyone who understood what they were looking at, this was a serious warning signal. It suggested the two supposedly separate companies were deeply, dangerously entangled. The article circulated. Questions spread through industry forums and social media. Then, on November 6th, Changpeng Zhao, the CEO of Binance, FTX's largest rival, made a public announcement on Twitter. Binance had received FTT tokens as part of an earlier deal. Zhao said Binance would be selling all of them. Immediately. The effect was instant. FTT's price began falling. Customers started withdrawing funds from FTX. Word spread faster. More customers tried to withdraw. The withdrawals accelerated. On November 8th, over $6 billion in withdrawal requests came in. FTX could not cover them. Sam reached out to Changpeng Zhao. Binance agreed, tentatively, to acquire FTX and rescue it. The announcement briefly calmed the panic. Then, Binance looked at FTX's actual financial records. Within 24 hours, Binance walked away. The hole was too large. The problems were too deep. On November 11th, 2022, FTX filed for bankruptcy. 130,000 creditors. $8 billion in missing customer funds. John Ray III, the restructuring expert who oversaw Enron's collapse, was brought in as the new CEO. He would later tell a bankruptcy court that in his entire career, he had never seen such a complete failure of corporate controls and such a complete absence of trustworthy financial information. Part 7. After the fall. Sam did not go quiet. In the weeks after the collapse, while remaining in the Bahamas, he gave interview after interview. He appeared on Twitter Spaces. He wrote long public posts. He apologized for mistakes, while disputing the characterization of those mistakes as crimes. He said he hadn't fully understood the extent of Alameda's exposure to FTX funds. He said it was a risk management failure, not fraud. He used the phrase, "I didn't knowingly commit fraud," often enough that it became its own kind of story. On December 12th, 2022, Bahamian authorities arrested him at his apartment, acting on a request from U.S. prosecutors. He was extradited to the United States and charged with wire fraud, commodities fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. He was released on a $25 million bail package
and placed under house arrest at his parents' home in Palo Alto, California.
A short drive from Stanford, where his parents still taught law. In the months that followed, almost everyone around him cooperated with prosecutors. Caroline Ellison, the CEO of Alameda and Sam's on-and-off romantic partner, pleaded guilty and agreed to testify against him. Ryan Salame and Nishad Singh, two of FTX's most senior executives, also pleaded guilty. Gary Wang, FTX's co-founder and chief technology officer, did the same. The people who knew the most about what had happened inside FTX and Alameda were now prepared to tell the government everything. Part 8. The Trial. The trial of Sam Bankman-Fried began in October 2023 in the Southern District of New York. The prosecution's case was direct. FTX customers had deposited funds believing their money was safe. Instead, that money had been transferred to Alameda Research, which used it to make risky trades, invest in illiquid assets, make political donations, and purchase real estate, including the luxury apartments in Nassau. When the market turned and customers wanted their money back, the money wasn't there. Caroline Ellison took the stand and testified for multiple days. She described meetings in which Sam had directed Alameda to use FTX customer funds. She described spreadsheets that had been created specifically to hide the extent of the borrowing from outside parties. She described a culture in which the rules that were supposed to protect customers were treated internally as obstacles. Sam testified in his own defense. He maintained that he had not intended to defraud anyone. He said he had been unaware of the full scope of Alameda's positions. He acknowledged mistakes in risk management and described the collapse as the result of a market downturn combined with a bank run, not the result of deliberate theft. The jury was not convinced. On November 2nd, 2023, almost exactly 1 year after the CoinDesk article that had started the unraveling, the jury returned a verdict. Guilty on all 7 counts. Part 9. Sentencing and what remains. On March 28, 2024, Sam Bankman-Fried was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Judge Lewis Kaplan, in delivering the sentence, said there was a risk that Sam would, if given the opportunity, commit fraud again. The judge did not appear persuaded by the argument that the collapse had been an accident, or that Sam's prior charitable intentions were relevant to his culpability for what had happened to his customers. Sam's lawyers filed an appeal. As of mid-2026, the appeals process is ongoing. The money, for most customers, is still a complicated story. The FTX bankruptcy estate has recovered more assets than initially expected, and creditors are expected to receive substantial recovery. In some cases, close to full repayment of their original dollar deposits. But the broader damage, to people who had held crypto assets on the platform, to businesses that had trusted FTX as a counterparty,
to the reputation of an entire industry, is harder to quantify. Closing. What the story is about. So what do we make of Sam Bankman-Fried? He is not an easy figure to place. He was clearly intelligent. He was clearly driven. And there is genuine debate, even now, about what he actually believed about himself and his actions in those final years. But here is the thing that the story keeps returning to. The most effective lies are the ones the liar also tells themselves. Sam had a framework: effective altruism, expected value, maximizing good. That was, in principle, a serious intellectual tradition. But it is also a framework that, if applied carelessly, can become a justification machine. If you believe your ends are important enough, the framework can quietly begin to excuse the means. A small risk here is fine, because the expected upside is enormous. A shortcut there is acceptable, because the alternative is worse. The customers will be made whole eventually.
The fraud isn't really fraud if it's temporary. Whether Sam consciously knew he was committing fraud, or whether he had genuinely convinced himself that the math worked out, the outcome for 130,000 customers was the same. The money was gone, And the man who had told the world he was going to save it was sitting in a federal courtroom, being convicted of stealing from the people who had trusted him. The handprint on the wall, in the end, was not the one he intended to leave.